Hello, everyone, and welcome to the cutting room floor where we discuss some of the things we didn't have time for on Sunday mornings. And there's quite a few topics. But before we talk about those topics, we have with us some esteemed guests. We have Daniella, one of our hosts.
That's me. Good morning.
And then we have Tim Miller, one of our pastors.
Hi, good morning.
And Johnny is up in the mountains with his wife and kids celebrating Ashley's birthday. So I guess we'll allow him a break. He doesn't have to do it this week. Yeah.
But he'll be
He's
missed.
having fun.
He will be missed. So as always, I am opening you up on my phone. So if you put any comments into the face on this is on Facebook, it'll be on YouTube later. But if you put any comments, we will talk about those. So go ahead and do that. Let us know you're here watching. So first subject, we talked about Luke chapter 23. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was Herod. It was always a bit weird that he wouldn't try and save Herod, right? Like what we talked about with evangelism. Why was he's there in front of a world leader? Why isn't he saving him? And so that's why we went into all the backstory that Herod killed John the Baptist. Herod had all the opportunities to hear the truth. By the time Jesus is in front of him, was it just like, yeah, I'm done with you? Tim, start us off. What were your thoughts on all that?
Well, just even the way you put everything of like, there's a certain point where, it says, don't cast your pearls before swine. There's a certain point where it's like, you've had so many options and opportunities. And I was thinking about that, and that was hard to wrestle with kind of, because you're always like, man, God is a God of second chances. And he, it's never too late to come to him, which is true. But then there's also like, man, there's people that just aren't going to accept, and there's people that are just not going to accept. And even when we were talking about, what were we talking about? Like the Judas being like predestined to like play his role in the story. It's like, okay, it was Herod predestined to like play his role where he just wasn't going to accept. Jesus was just a party trick to him. Jesus was a and he said, oh, cool, this guy that they've been talking about, he's in the area. I'm hoping maybe he'll perform a sign or miracle for me. And it's actually pretty insulting, really, to be like, that's the only thing that you would want or desire from Jesus. And so, yeah, I'm glad that Jesus kept his mouth shut and just didn't answer Herod's question.
That's a great contrast. I never thought about like the Judas story and the Herod story. Just that's interesting. At least we always kind of on Easter really talk about the glory of the moment and the resurrection, but there's some pretty sad characters along the way. That's interesting. Yeah. And I did wrestle with the exact same thing. I go, there is a limit. I go, that's a terrible point, because there's never a limit. There's never a limit. God will always, you can always come back to him. So I go, that's a terrible point. And then I'm like, yeah, but I think we sometimes need to realize we're always needing more knowledge. I'm not sure. And it's like, hey, first of all, we don't know when we're going to die. You could die in a car accident today, which is freaky to think about. So you might want to make a decision. But on the other hand of it, like, there is a point where you've got to just step in with faith. Daniella, what are your thoughts?
I mean, we just from knowing pre-Herod's story, the dancing girl, I'm going to give you whatever you want. What does she ask for? John's head on a platter. And what does Herod do? Herod knows it's not right, but he wants to save face. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. He wants to be like, I told her I would give her whatever she wanted, so I got to do it. Like, I can't prove the opposite of what I'm going to say. So Herod's background, Jesus was probably like, I'm not dealing with this. Like, I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to give to it. And I think that like can correlate a lot into our daily lives too, is talking a little bit earlier, Jesus could have been a little petty right there, but he chose not to answer any of those questions. Why give time to those who you know, their intentions, their character, like we were talking about and what you were preaching, I think it was this past Sunday, but you can preach, you can evangelize, you can share the gospel as much as you want, but there comes a point where someone is going to have to say, am I going to do something about this, or am I just going to keep listening to people preach to me? Am I
Mm,
going to take action, or am I going to start practicing my faith? Am I going to start believing in this, or am I just going to keep hearing over and over and over again? And I think Jesus was kind of at the point, well, Herod, you know the gospel, you know the truth. This is your opportunity to choose to follow, or opportunity to, you know, follow the crowd. And that's what we were talking about on Sunday.
and there's a couple times in the Bible where it does say, I'm not going to throw my pearls at swine. Dust off your sandals and walk away if they don't accept what you're saying. We forget, I think, that part of Jesus, it's like, yeah, at some point you just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, what an interesting, I just don't preach on it very often. And so
I feel like we could go on a lot on this topic too, because it shows Jesus's human side. It
Mhm.
shows the side that is so relatable to us as well. So, you know, in instances where I have had to say, this situation no longer is good for me, whether it be, family situations or personal situations, like whatever situations they are. But Jesus at one point said, the choice is yours now. I have to, you know,
Yeah.
let you make that personal choice. And you're right. I mean, don't throw your pearls to the swine.
You know
We
what
Not
see
my pearls.
on
Not my
Sunday
pearls.
you were like, so if you're watching this, they do Tim and Daniela do a pre-service to kind of get all the people online the greeting that you would get if you were here. And she was talking about Pilate, but you call it Pilates.
Yeah.
I think a lot of your what do you call that? Just the way you first see things is so funny. It makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Anyway, back
Yeah.
to the point.
dude, Herod.
Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I just what a fool, honestly. Like, because here he was like entertained by John the Baptist too, and like he's puzzled, like, whoa, maybe I never. Because if he hears John the Baptist speak, and he's speaking truth, and he enough to where Herod like stops to like say, oh wow, I want to contemplate that, or like those are really thought-provoking things that John the Baptist is saying. Yeah, you're right. His willingness to just, okay, well, whatever the crowd wants, or my reputation is so much greater or more important that, he has John beheaded, and he gets the chance to be in front of Jesus again. And he tries to give Jesus the opportunity to do the little party tricks, answer his questions, entertain me for a little bit. Oh, no, he doesn't. Okay, well, then they mocked him and ridiculed him and sent him in an elegant robe and sent him back to Pilate. And it's like, what a jerk.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
really does push it to a new level there at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think what we see over and over with Jesus is it's a real person and it's a real relationship.
Yeah.
And all of these very authentic relationships. And that is what we have to remember, because there's a lot of times I think of God as like God of the universe. God is the creator. And I want to respect him in that realm. And so
Absolutely.
I almost don't even personalize it until I talk more about Jesus. And then I see a real person that's having real emotion. And I go, I need to have real emotion with Jesus myself. If I'm having a
Yeah.
real relationship with him, my real emotions are there, and I need to treat him like someone that also is real. I would not go to my parents and just ask them for stuff all the time. That's not a relationship. And so that's how our prayers begin to sound. And so if he's just the God of Santa Claus, that's not a real relationship, and you're not treating him like a real person. And he shows many times real emotion. So there's a lot to take away from that part of the story.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome. I've actually not until we've started, I've read the Bible and Matthew, the Gospels, Luke, but we've really dove really deep into Luke, and I've been able to apply so much because I've been able to see Jesus as someone like we've been talking about, with real emotions, real feelings, real responses, real like conflictions or internal battles. And I'm just like, I can relate so much. Jesus and I, we both feel. And like you said, but then if you treat somebody bad, you're going to feel a negative way towards that. So why wouldn't God be hurt, or why wouldn't God be emotional when we turn our backs to him? So,
yeah, good stuff.
I love this study.
I know it's almost over and I'm sad. Okay, so Simon of Cyrene, what an interesting character. I spent so long yesterday trying to find information about him. There's not a lot. And we know let's see what I got here. He is from Tripoli, which would be modern day Libya. So we know that he traveled a long distance. We know he's a devout Jew. He wants to be there for the festivals. We find in other places throughout the Bible where his kids are mentioned by first name. That's interesting. So you don't see that a lot, where they're just saying the name randomly. We see it in Romans 16. We see it, I wrote down somewhere else, Matthew, I lost it. Anyway, they're just mentioning the kids. Hey, by the way, say hi to Rufus. In one part of Romans 16, Paul speaks of how Rufus and I believe his wife, anyway, he talks about how much they've really influenced and helped him. That's his kids. So you kind of see some pieces here of the story that afterwards the family goes on to do incredible things. But
you had to do some digging to find that, right?
What'd you say?
You had to do some digging to find that.
It was hard. And I went to other books saying, okay, maybe they talk about him in Josephus and some other stuff, and not a whole lot. So what that tells me is this is it's one sentence. It's a random guy that went there to do his part with God. He's kind of walking by. It doesn't even say he was like watching the incident. He's walking by and he's pulled in to do this thing for Jesus. We do know that Jesus carried the cross out after the beating, but he's so beat up. I don't know how far he makes it. It says just outside of town. So he doesn't make it very far. And then they pull this guy in to carry the cross the rest of the way. What do you guys think about this? Why do you think this is there? Tim, what do you think?
Well, just hearing you speak made me think of something that Pastor John had said to me that's really stuck. Was your calling is irrevocable. And I think of how many times I've ran from the Lord and not wanted to live his calling. So many times I've ran from God's calling or knowing that he has a plan or purpose for my life. And I think there's times where God definitely intervenes and says, kind of jumps in front of your face and says, look, hey, I have something for you. And so I didn't realize that Simon of Cyrene ended up leaving a legacy where his family is now pursuing Jesus or being part of the disciples or having their part in the ministry. That's huge. That's amazing. So that time of suffering, right, of having to carry Jesus's cross probably seemed so unfair and unjust to him at the time. I'm just some random guy walking through the street, and now all of a sudden getting whipped and carrying a rugged cross, I don't know that he was whipped, but I'm sure he probably got a splinter from the cross.
I got chills as you were talking, because I'm thinking it's a moment of, I'm just being faithful with what God has called me to do, and I'm at this thing. And then you're pulled into something so much more. and you don't know why. And he was probably, I think the Passion of the Christ movie showed it pretty well. Like, why are you choosing me to do this? Like, I kind of like how they depicted that. Like, I don't want to do this, but he's pulled into something. I'm sure this is the part we don't know. I'm sure he's moved greatly from it. And from that point on, not only are his kids mentioned, but the Jews of Tripoli, the Jews of several times, that area he's from is mentioned as people that are highly influential in spreading the gospel. So he went back. I mean, we don't know this. I'm guessing here. I'm thinking he went back as a different person and told everyone about this Jesus, completely changed a city that becomes an evangelistic hub to the rest of the world. His family goes on from that point. So yeah, a lot happens. We have to sort of guess on it, but I think we can put some pretty good guesses. Danielle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was like reading a couple of different versions right now, so I was looking down, but reading a couple of versions and comparing them, they pretty much all say the same thing. Simon came, he was pulled out and given the cross to, take. But the King James Version says that they laid the cross that he might bear, and then italicized, bear it after Jesus. So when I read that, I feel like Simon was put in that place to just for one moment bear that weight that Jesus was holding on to, just to give him a little bit of, I don't know, maybe relief or maybe support or maybe even just love. I don't know. As a disciple of Christ, you're called to do what you are called to do, be put in uncomfortable situations, be put in hard situations, especially when you least expect it. I mean, this man was just traveling into the city, just trying to mind his own business. And he gets pulled in, and here's your cross, man. And so, like Simon, I mean, he definitely didn't want to do that. I don't think anybody would want to bear that cross, bear that weight on the shoulders. Nobody wants to do that. Then you think about, well, Jesus did it.
Yeah. I was watching
So,
other speakers because I was trying to see what do other people say about this. So I was on YouTube just watching. That's the takeaway that most sermons end up doing. Most sermons are, you know what? You don't know what your cross is going to be. You gotta take whatever God throws you in that moment. And then what they leave out, and I think is most important, is the legacy that goes beyond that we sort of just touched on. Tim, any final thoughts?
He gets a part in the story. Like, what an honor, right?
Yeah.
What a just, yeah. I think God had something for him, and like we see that legacy that was left afterwards. But he got a part in that story, and so I just think, and we get that opportunity to like choose to be a part of God's family and like get to partake in the continual story. But I'm also so thankful for the times where like God jumps in front of my face and says like, hey, you are part of my story. And I'm like waving at you to get your,
That's so good. So that's so good. Don't shy away when you're thrown into something that you're uncomfortable and you don't think this is what you're supposed to be doing, or this isn't what you wanted to do. God threw me into something way bigger, way harder than I ever expected. Don't shy away from that.
I get to speak at Fellowship of Christian Athletes today with John, and really I'm going on his ways are higher and greater. His thoughts for you are higher and greater than your own. And so just really showing that God's love and God's plan for us is good.
Yeah.
This is why we have to do the cutting room floor. We've done 2 separate sermons from the one on Sunday now. Then the third one, so this will be the final subject, is the thief on the cross. What you could do the whole message just based on that one line.
You really can.
I don't know. I'll let you, Tim, you start us off. Like what do you think about that moment?
Two men at the very end of themselves, right? They have come to terms saying like, I am not getting off this cross. I'm already nailed up here. Like I am in my last minutes of life. And we see someone continue to be a fool, and we see someone continue to just shun Jesus, or continue no remorse even really for their lifestyle. I mean, it's kind of just like a laugh it off, shrug it off, like, oh well, this is just what I was given, or now I got to accept it. I don't know. And the thief on the cross, I don't know, has the epiphany, or God reveals himself, or just, it's so moving to see a repentant heart in those last moments, opposed to a calloused heart in those last moments. And so I think there's a whole sermon there on the contrast of people's hearts. And even like what we were saying, of there's a point where you get so many options and opportunities to like return or accept truth, and some people just don't, and that's a hard pill to swallow. That's something sad. You know?
The contrast is the message. I hear a lot of people, they go, the idea that I can just be on my deathbed and just accept Christ in the last moment, or someone in prison at their last days, I can't see like how that's fair. And I'm always like, yeah, but people don't even do it. You got this guy on the cross. All he really has to do is have a moment with Jesus right there, and say a prayer with Jesus, and he doesn't do it. And I think a lot of people in our world, we think like in the last moment, after a life of being totally against God, that we're just in the last second going to say, okay, I'm in. That's not what people do.
Well, that's what we say. Memorial.
We build up this like, I'm against God, I'm against God, I'm against God. In the last seconds of your life, you don't change that much. So how you are now is kind of how you're going to end. And so you want to start changing now. And so if you're not getting it, and I don't imagine that many people watching this who don't get it, but you want to be preparing as with the end in mind right now. It's not something you do last second, right? I guess the other guy did, so I don't know. Danielle, what are your thoughts?
I mean, like the biggest takeaway that I see, and again, like we have to be very careful with this whole, I can wait last minute because the guy on the cross did it, so I can wait last minute, like, but the biggest takeaway that I see is that Jesus is he is so merciful that even at the last second, when this man was probably terrified, mortified, scared, like dying, and it's not like, not to be too mortifying or anything, but this man was suffering physically, and what Jesus offered him was the biggest comfort, to enter into heaven. I think that was like a point of like relief, let go for this man, and the mercy that he was shown, the love that he was shown at that last minute, and being told that you're going to be remembered in paradise and you're going to be welcomed into paradise. I'm sure that was so soothing and comforting, even though it was like such a terrible moment. And then the other guy just gone. So, but just showing how merciful Jesus is, that even then, I mean, obviously this man showed true repentance. He was up there on the cross, and Jesus said to him, you will be with me in paradise. The man showed obvious remorse. The man was remorseful.
There's a moment of repentance is kind of what you're saying.
Yes. And that's
like that,
the intention, the point. You can come to Jesus at any given time and say, all right, I'm in, Jesus, but are you remorseful for your past, and are you willing to change for your future and live for God, live in his ways?
That's a really good insight, because you what you're mentioning is the grace is real, and we preach about grace, and this is the ultimate example of grace. The guys on the cross were doing bad things, right? But because of the remorseful, repentive heart, the grace was enough. And I think when we think about eternity being forever and this life being very, very short, it's important to understand that moment does matter and it does affect the future. Jim just wrote, his dad had a deathbed confession with a pastor. Yeah, so it
Wow.
happens where a pastor or someone goes in there and that person doesn't just, want to sign an insurance card. That's a little silly. And I don't think people do that as much as we think they might. It's
Yeah.
a remorseful realizing I've messed up. That I see God responding to.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Christian house and very much played the like, well, I'll just come to Jesus when it's convenient for me. And, he's always going to,
Mm,
and, I'll just return to him before it's too late. And so I was really, I had a moment in my, what am I, I'm 31 now. And I think I finally changed my life for the Lord at age like 22, just turning 23. And I had this like, I'll be a good Christian dad later. I'll be a good Christian. I want to raise my kids in the ways of the Lord. Like I'll be a good Christian
wow.
dad. And the Lord really kind of like got a hold of me in my back injury at the time. And it was like, I need you to be a good Christian son now, so you can be a good Christian father later. And those aren't the words I would use now, but that's how it was. He spoke to me then. And so, yeah, that obviously, there's those deathbed confessions, but what you said earlier on who you are now is likely who you're going to be, in those last moments also. So God's grace was so good for me to have that like realization of like, no, there's some things that need to take place now so you can like receive my inheritance later.
That's really good. And I appreciate you being open and honest about that. So if you're watching, I mean, this is just, I have to be a pastor and you need to make that commitment. And I think don't wait. Don't
Yeah.
try and be the guy on the cross making the last second decision. Now, God's grace was it was enough, so that was cool. But at the same time, seeing the other guy right there, and he still stays in his sin, knowing he's about to die. There's a lot to be said about that and how stubborn we get. So don't do that. All right, so much in 23. I've started working on 24, and we finally get to the resurrection. It's a lot more fun.
Woo.
We'll be back next week. Johnny will be back as well. And we will be continuing to everything we can't fit onto Sundays, put into these Cutting Room Floor podcasts, YouTube videos. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button, do that so it'll pop up when we pop up. But share it. I think the subjects we talked about, there was 3 incredible subjects there. The subjects we talked about are important. So get that out to your friends, share the video. And then if you are in the Corsko, Madera, Oakhurst area, come join us this Sunday at 9 and 11 at Yosemite Lakes Church, and we'll see you next time.